Alright folks, with the Walking Dead universe recently turning 15 years old, I thought it would be a good idea to spend some time reflecting on the journey so far by ranking every season of The Walking Dead and its spin-offs from my least favorite to favorite. With there being 28 seasons of this franchise, naturally there are periods I find weaker than others. Far weaker. So to keep my thoughts somewhat structured, I'm going to be segmenting our list into 4 sectors as we go along. Bad, okay to decent, good to great, and S tier. And naturally, I'm gonna have more to say about some seasons than others. But remember, these are all just my opinions that will surely vary from yours. So even if you disagree with my list, I'd love to hear your own in the comments down below. And just to give you a warning before we get started, there will be spoilers for all things The Walking Dead universe in this video. So with that, sit back, relax, pop a can of pudding, and maybe drop a like and sub on your way out if you end up enjoying this video. But starting out at the bottom of the bad tier with number 28, aka my absolute least favorite piece of The Walking Dead content to ever release, Fear the Walking Dead Season 5. Now, where do I even begin? When I dislike a piece of content, whether that's a show, movie, or game, I often find myself having just as much fun explaining why something doesn't work for me as I do explaining why it does. But for Fear the Walking Dead Season 5, it's the opposite. Not only is it written to offend your intelligence, but it is so utterly uninteresting from start to finish that I get bored even complaining about it. I've been extremely vocal about my hatred for the Ian and Andrew era of Fear, but Season 5 truly is the worst of it. At the very least, Seasons 7 and 8 of this dumpster fire tread on the it's so bad it's actually kind of entertaining territory, but Season 5 is just a dull piece of television, period. From the get-go, Season 5 continues this nasty gray filter from the previous that never goes away. Well, actually, it does for 2 episodes. The found footage documentary installments that are somehow even more unwatchable than the rest of the season. Seriously, just watch the Tom Bridge scene. Even the cast behind the scenes knew this wasn't it. We're brought into the season with a plane crash that comes out of nowhere, while the entire first half focuses on a group of children who are somehow capable of repairing it before never being seen again past this arc. Characters like Dwight are taken from the main show and plopped here, only to basically do nothing throughout his entire introduction, with the cast only continuing to bloat with unmemorable faces as the season goes on, while failing to ever kill anyone off, capped off with a fake-out death that was never gonna fool anyone and just left fans annoyed. The nuclear meltdown stuff, in a sense, could have been cool, but it wasn't utilized to its fullest potential, and the reveal of the CRM's name and their uniforms did keep conversation going for a short period, but none of this was enough to ignore how straight up bad the writing is. Oh my god, and the beer bottle balloon, I actually almost forgot about that. There are a million things I could rant about, like the poor antagonists, uninteresting settings, and disrespectful treatment of OG characters like Luciana. But again, nobody wants to talk about Ian and Andrew's Fear for longer than they have to, so I'll just leave it at this. I will never rewatch this season. I regret spending my time watching it, and I hate what it does to the legacy of the Erickson era. I think that's the worst chain of insults I can really give to a franchise I overall love. Now, Tales of the Walking Dead is a season of television that just disappoints me so much. An anthology series with no restrictions on where or when it can take place in the timeline is exactly what the franchise needed at the time. But for whatever reason, the writers and showrunner decided to use the series as an experimental ground for what I believe to be largely non-canon and confusing BS. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about my own ideas for what it could have been, as I have a whole video doing that right here. But as a guy who loves the grounded lore of this franchise, a time loop Groundhog Day and witch haunting episode is just not it. The Terry Crews episode, in my opinion, is very generic and uninspired, while using old sets that confused some fans at the time, while the Gina and Blair episode is just my least favorite thing ever. I know a lot of people like it because it's something different and it's a more comedic take on the franchise, but I just hate the time loop and wish they stuck to the original plan of showing the fall of Atlanta minute by minute. The Alpha episode is alright for the most part, but I really don't like how it makes the Whisperers predate Alpha and Beta. while Amy and Dr. Everett just make zero sense with the dead sector and 200-foot trench and confuses me when discussing the future of the franchise. I remember not minding the A-Train episode originally, but on reflection it doesn't really do anything special and reintroduces the PPP card, which just frustrates me as I know the writers have no answer for it. And the finale, well, I have no idea what's even supposed to be real or not. I've heard ideas that this episode and the Gina and Blair episodes are supposed to depict the minds of people in the process of turning, but if that is the case, I think they did a terrible job of conveying that. Overall, I hated Tales, but with that being said, it's still an amazing concept for a series that I truly hope they take another shot at eventually. All you have to do is listen to what the fans want. Now, honestly, most of the Ian and Andrew era seasons of Fear are interchangeably terrible, but the reason Season 8 falls so particularly low is because it really felt like there was no oversight during the second half, which left the writers with no restraint when essentially crafting a canon-breaking story. Padre was an antagonistic organization that was built up for an entire season, only to be revealed as a silly group obsessed with kidnapping children because their leaders had daddy issues. The reintroduction of Madison was exciting for like an episode, until they Ian and Andrew'd her into oblivion. And although I don't mind the revisiting of King County, Morgan's exit left the writers with no direction to finish out the series, which led them to straight up resurrect Troy Otto from the dead out of desperation, only to ruin his character and then kill him off again. At this point in the series, it was impossible to make an ending satisfying, but I guess, at the very least, they didn't kill off Alicia and allowed the two to reunite, even though they dangled her like a carrot on a stick throughout the whole season. Overall, this is a horribly written installment of the Walking Dead universe, but it at least made me laugh with some of its goofiness, which is more than what I can say for Season 5 or Tales. Yeah, clearly, I really hate post-Erickson Fear. This season basically has all the same problems as Season 8, and you practically have to suspend your disbelief throughout its entire run with how it treats radiation, though it does have one little glowing light in the darkness that boosts it above its successor. Strand's Tower, aka his moderately sized office building being the only safe place in the entire region, makes literally zero sense and is the main driving force throughout the season, while the piss yellow filter and frequent use of cheap sound stages becomes extremely distracting throughout its run. Characters like Wes flip motives at the drop of a dime, while the cast bloat issues continue, but despite it all, the one thing that puts this garbage season above the others is Coleman Domingo. You can just tell he is having the time of his life portraying Strand as this mustache-twirling villain, regardless of the script's quality, and I can't help but admire it, which actually does give it some value on a rewatch. Alright, this is the last of the Fear bashing. Honestly, what is there to say about Fear Season 4 that hasn't already been said? It is the first season to bring in Ian and Andrew as showrunners while introducing Morgan as the new protagonist, and although it treats its old cast like side characters in their own show and spits on their grave, I guess, it at least has a plot that progresses in a logical way. Despite how poorly they interpreted what Fear was, I feel like I can get some form of closure from the flashback segments of the first half. It's not satisfying in any sense, but Madison's sacrifice at least allows me to hop off on a rewatch while losing as little sleep as possible. Yes, I'm being dramatic on purpose. I hate it. It's the ugliest piece of the Walking Dead content with its gray filter. It's blasphemous for what Fear was, but it's more competently written at times than the previously ranked seasons. So, good job, Season 4, I guess. I hate talking about Daryl Dixon Season 2, but at least we're out of the Fear rut. I've been very vocal on my displeasure with this season, so I'll keep it brief, but this 6-episode stretch essentially discards everything the first season built up in an extremely rushed fashion. Characters who began to grow on me were tossed to the side in order to move on to Spain as quick as possible, and the most intriguing ideas presented, like the variants, are never even given answers at all. This season is the definition of unsatisfying and made me much less willing to give Season 3 a chance, though it is beautifully shot and it stays true to Daryl and Carol's characters, whereas most of Ian and Andrew's Fear disrespects its original characters and looks straight up gross. Dead City Season 1 isn't perfect by any means, but Season 2 exacerbates its problems while feeling far cheaper. I really love the idea of power being restored to Manhattan going into this season, but I think these large ideas just fall apart with the writing. Herschel is by far the biggest problem this season, and when I caught on to the fact that there was no twist with him coming and he really was just turning on his mom, I basically lost all interest in his character. The Dama fake-out death is silly and turns her into a creepy children-stealing witch in the shadows, while Negan ends the season feeling unimportant at a time when he should have been rising to his second peak. Overall, it really feels like everyone is losing steam this season. A lot of cool ideas like the Mega Horde and the rooftop colonies from the first season are practically abandoned for more scenes in the woods, while New Babylon is one of the most underdeveloped factions I think we've ever seen in the franchise, as we haven't even been given a map of their territory. This season feels underwhelming and actually shrinks the scale of Manhattan instead of expanding it, though I don't think it did irreparable damage the same way the Book of Carol did. Now, Daryl Dixon Season 3 is the most recent season of the Walking Dead universe, and admittedly, I think this may be the toughest season for me to place on this whole list. I tried my very best to be engaged with this installment, but between the poor quality of the Book of Carol and the announcement of Daryl Dixon ending at Season 4, most of my interest for the series has been completely killed. Everything presented this season has a sense of unoriginality despite taking place in a completely unique setting. Plotlines involving the King of Spain and Alcazar feel like a retread of Pavor from the last season with a dash of Savior sprinkled in. The season begins with Daryl and Carol being stranded on the shore of Spain, and ends with them being stranded on the shore of Spain, which makes me feel like we're just spinning our wheels here until the finale. With all that being said, however, I think a lack of interest is an improvement over something that makes me angry or upset, which is why I've ranked it as high as it is, despite not being able to finish reviewing it. But with that, we are now moving on from the bad tier to the okay to decent tier. World Beyond in general, in my opinion, is just kind of a pointless show, though I think it is competently written for the most part. I find the series rather boring and uninteresting at times, with elements of intrigue, which is still less offensive than some of the previously ranked installments, but when comparing its two seasons, the first is by far the weaker of the pair. It was cool to see the CRM in their proper form for the first time and to learn of their villainy, but none of the characters in the show clicked with me this season, especially the main kids, which is an issue with a show of this nature. This is one of those cases where I can see how someone could enjoy it more than me, but the tone overall just doesn't feel like something I'm looking for in the Walking Dead universe. It's cool to learn of the super colonies and to see the destruction of Omaha, but I think it would have been way more interesting to see all of this unfold for the first time in The Ones Who Live. In conclusion, I don't think this season does anything too offensive to the franchise in general, but it greatly struggles to hold my attention when it isn't focusing on the CRM. Now, again, I still think this series was unnecessary, but admittedly Season 2 is an improvement over the first. Jadis was a much-needed antagonist who stole the show every time she was on screen, and characters like Huck did become significantly more likable, though the main kids, aside from maybe Silas, still never really clicked with me, and the ending retroactively feels utterly pointless considering The Ones Who Live does the exact same thing again, but with a more influential outcome. I think that's just kind of my problem with this series in general. It feels like pieces of The Ones Who Live were extracted and infused into this side story because they knew they only had so much time with Rick and Michonne. And don't even get me started on that post-credit scene. But with all that being said, I've seen much worse in this franchise. Now, I know a lot of people think Season 8 is the worst season of the main show, but I have never agreed with that sentiment. Season 8 may be poorly paced and have issues with the writing. However, Season 7 is that, but far more unfocused. The show takes this split storytelling approach this season that leaves you without seeing most main characters for episodes on end, which obviously killed the momentum of the impact of Glenn's death, as you don't see Rick and company for 3 episodes after, with Maggie not appearing until episode 5. The season does improve on the structure in the second half, but by then, it's already been plagued with introducing way too many new groups, some of which being pretty useless to the war in the grand scheme of things, such as Oceanside and the Garbage People. However, when comparing this season to the previously ranked, I find myself enjoying far more episodes and individual moments. The premiere is still one of the most memorable to date, and installments such as Service, Sing Me a Song, Hearts Still Beating, and Rockin' a Road are all solid watches. But for me, Season 7 is just a case of delaying the inevitable. What we wanted to see was the war, but at the time, we knew that wasn't coming until Season 8, so all we were left with was the prep and a short skirmish. This absolutely could have been condensed into a half season, though even the worst of the main show falls around the middle of the road in terms of my enjoyment. Now, I'm not really sure if this is going to be a controversial take, but I think Season 11 is one of the most inconsistent seasons of the main show. Admittedly, I think episodes 9 to 16 are really solid and entertaining with its introduction to the Commonwealth, which puts it above Season 7, but the Reaper arc is utterly pointless, while the ending of the Commonwealth arc completely loses the plot before failing to actually end the series altogether. I feel kind of bad for this season, as it was plagued with a ton of behind-the-scenes issues. Not only did COVID delay the production, but it was never even intended to be the final season at all. They were going to keep going until at least Season 15, with the Reapers being the main antagonists for Season 11, but when AMC made the decision to end the show and split the story into spin-offs, the writing team had to cut the arc short while forcing in the Commonwealth early. Or at least early for what they had planned. These issues can be seen all throughout the season, right up until the end, and as a result, it also feels disconnected from what's going on in the wider franchise. The Commonwealth was immediately undermined by the CRM in World Beyond before they were even introduced, so a lot of the excitement this season came from potentially seeing Rick again, which only really manifested in The Ones Who Live. Lance Hornsby is by far the best addition to the season and single-handedly keeps it from falling further, but he isn't enough to make the season anything more than an okay watch when judged as one solid installment. Its highs are very high and very entertaining, but its lows are abundant and hard to ignore. Now, Daryl Dixon's Season 1 for me is probably the first season to cross from that okay area of the tier to the decent side. From the start, it was kind of a weird direction to take Daryl in general, but I thought they did a rather good job of showing off the country and culture while introducing ideas that had the potential to shake up what we know about the franchise altogether. The issue is, I'm recording this video in a post-Book of Carol world where all of these interesting plots, characters, and ideas were squandered, so now I'm just kinda left with a bitter feeling when revisiting this season. Still though, I can't discredit how intrigued I continue to feel about unanswered questions it brought up. Now, much like Daryl Dixon's Season 1, I did really enjoy the start of the series. I think it introduces a lot of cool ideas and original characteristics for Manhattan, while feeling like a natural progression for the state of the world with its expanding factions. Though, admittedly, this season does become a bit shaky when you start scrutinizing why Maggie isn't relying on the Commonwealth for help. But in all honesty, I think this problem becomes way worse when New Babylon begins forcefully conscripting people in Season 2. The Croat is a fantastic addition to this universe, and the mega horde circling the island is a super cool idea. And although Season 2 ruins a lot of it, much like the Book of Carol, Dead City Season 1 to me feels more like its own story, whereas Daryl Seasons 1 and 2 feel like two sides of the same coin. Now, I know I've made it clear how much I hate Ian and Andrew's fear, so Season 6 being this high may seem weird, but I think this installment is actually an exciting watch that balances the Pioneer plot and the Doomsday Cult plot pretty well. It's clear these writers struggle to come up with interesting ideas with such quick turnaround times between seasons. But with COVID delaying the first half, it's clear Ian and Andrew were given a bit more time to actually try to do their jobs, which definitely comes through in most of the season's quality. From the get-go, its premiere is outstandingly entertaining compared to the previous two seasons that came before, as it introduces and kills off a unique side villain in a tasteful manner and elevates Morgan back into the badass he was meant to be, while the subsequent episodes continue to bring interesting ideas to the table, such as a community being ravaged by the bubonic plague. My issue with The Walking Dead Season 7 was its split storytelling approach, as the core cast was always strongest when together. But in Fear's case, well, it was kind of the opposite issue, as the bulk of the cast was uninteresting and underdeveloped. So splitting them up actually gave many of them their own moments to shine, especially John Dory in episode 4. Admittedly, I think the first half is miles better than the second half, and I have to acknowledge how the nukes feel like the show is treading on jumping the shark. But something about that era just clicks with me, whether that's because of the Western cowboy feel, or simply because we were finally given an interesting plotline to follow. I also remember heavy discussions around Madison's return during this time, which was really exciting to keep up with. So although it isn't perfect by any means, I do have a soft spot for this season, which is why I've ranked it so high. Now, as much as I hate to say it, I do think Season 10 is one of the weaker seasons of the main show, which may sound crazy to those who know how highly I regard Season 9. That being said, however, number 13 is still much higher than most seasons in this franchise. But from that premiere episode, something about the tone just didn't quite feel the same as the previous season. In my opinion, the Whisperers are almost presented in a more cartoonish/culty way than before. It's not particularly over the top, but I think the stuff with Dante just comes off as bizarre given Alexandria was a paradise and he only just joined the Whisperers. The first half in general is a pretty slow burn, but what elevates this season for me above the rest is Whisperer Negan and the Whisperer War itself. Episodes 10 to 12 are some of the most exciting installments of the arc, and I think Beta was handled much better than he was in the comics. The decision to turn him into Alpha Beta after Alpha's death was genius, and I love how excited he gets about fully losing his mind. He's so maniacally evil, you can't help but get hyped. The COVID episodes, however, have always felt really weird and disconnected from the season. And although Here's Negan is a solid episode, it seems like everyone else likes it more than I do, so overall, Season 10 has many high points, but at times can feel like a case of hitting the gas and pumping the brakes over and over again. Oh boy, I really wonder if this is going to be a controversial take. Yes, I know a lot of people regard The Walking Dead Season 8 as the season that killed the show, and although there absolutely is some truth to that, I don't think it's nearly as bad as everyone makes it out to be. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like enough time has passed for me to cope hard enough with Carl's death. I still don't agree with it, but lately I've been able to separate my feelings with that decision from the actual story being told itself, and honestly, it is a pretty great watch when you are able to do that. The first 5 episodes are extremely entertaining, and although the middle of the season has a clear dip in pacing and momentum, I think the last half really brings it home with how exhausting the war was for not only the characters, but for us as the viewers who have been on this journey with them. Episode 12, The Key, is a top tier episode, and Wrath is still the best soft ending we've gotten for the series. That being said, however, it's hard to ignore the weak action, dialogue, pacing, and Carl's death, while Morales' cliffhanger still rubs me the wrong way to this day, which heavily prevents it from moving any higher up the list. But going by my gut feeling, I always look forward to Season 8 over Seasons 7, 10, and 11 on a rewatch, and I keep being drawn to it more as time goes on. We are now moving on from the okay to decent tier to the good to great tier. Now, I know a lot of people have issues with Fear Season 1 because it only focuses on the initial outbreak for a couple episodes, but this is one of the few times we really get to see how the military functioned during this era, which has become invaluable information when it comes to my lore videos. What I appreciate this season is how it was unafraid to have unconventional protagonists. Nick is inherently a selfish person who would rather sleep in a drug den than his own bed, yet you can't help but find him the most charming member of the cast, while characters like Travis and Alicia are presented as weak, but later develop into strong characters, which you can see the seeds being planted for here. I love Erickson's Fear, and I can rewatch it repeatedly without getting bored, but I think most would agree Season 1 is the weakest of the 3, though I think that's more so a case of budget and episode count rather than writing. Now, Fear Season 2 definitely has its issues, mostly stemming from a last-minute shift in direction that left the pirate arc feeling a bit unnecessary. But I think this season does an impeccable job of introducing us to Mexico, which at the time was the first instance we've seen outside the US. The cinematography this season is seriously off the charts, especially when utilizing the ocean set, while the episode Grotesque by itself is such a great depiction of survival in this world that alone elevates this season heavily. But what I remember the most from this season is Chris's death, as I still think it's one of the most shocking deaths we've seen in this franchise. I think it should be a testament to Cliff Curtis's acting abilities, as I simply didn't believe the story of how Chris died at first, because I couldn't comprehend how Travis could even function as a character if it were true. I know a lot of people find the Colonia and hotel stuff a bit boring, but for me, just getting to see how different cultures and communities approached the early outbreak was cool enough to keep me fully engaged. Plus, Strand and Madison's relationship is one of the best in the show. Fear Season 2 is a clear step up from the previous, with tons of twists and turns throughout its run, though I think what's yet to come does have higher highs. Now, The Ones Who Live was probably one of the toughest seasons to place, but I think sometimes we as fans are so clouded by the weak ending that we forget just how great those first 4 episodes are. The premiere of this miniseries is still astonishingly good for how long it was stuck in production hell, and pretty much pulls no stops when it comes to making you feel like you're watching something with an actual budget. It's easily the best thing they put out in the post-main show era, and it's not even close. I do think the second episode is quite a bit slower, but it provides a realistic explanation for Michonne's multi-year-long absence and brings the two face to face again for the first time in years. While episode 3 is extremely exciting, as we are getting to know this new version of Rick along with Michonne, who doesn't understand what these people are capable of, to the point where she spears him out of a helicopter, leading to an episode almost entirely consisting of a back and forth between the two that may have the best written dialogue The Walking Dead has produced in the last decade. If this show kept up this momentum to the end, it's very possible it could have been a top 3 installment of the franchise, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, episodes 5 and 6 feel like they were given a fraction of the time the previous episodes got in the writing room, which severely damages the legacy of the series. It truly feels like a speedrun to the end of the CRM arc, which it didn't need to be. And although the love story between Michonne and Rick is the crux of the show, I think some of their dialogue comes off as rather corny in the finale, which is wild considering how powerful that 4th episode was. Overall, the ending to me just made the two feel like Avengers when the rest of the series reminded us of how human they were, and I can't help but still feel a bit bitter because of it. I absolutely love 2/3 of The Ones Who Live and think it's some of the best Walking Dead content we've gotten in years, but I think the decisions made closing it out really damaged the hype for everything that was to come afterwards, which the franchise is still suffering from today. Now, seasons 1 to 6 of the main show are often regarded as the peak of the franchise, and arguably one of the best runs in TV history. And although I've seen season 6 ranked at number 1 for a lot of people, its flaws, in my opinion, make it the worst of the best. Its first 3 episodes are extremely exciting and well done, but throughout the rest of the first half, it felt like the writers here were getting a little too full of themselves with how patient they thought the audience was. The Glenn fake-out death was just a weak move from the writers, especially because his actual death was less than a season away, which was also left on a cliffhanger that didn't help with that feeling of dissatisfaction. While scenes like the Savior ambush on the road felt less like a real interaction and more like a post-credit scene. With all those negatives out of the way, however, I think No Way Out is just as good as people make it out to be, while the introduction to the hilltop and lead up to Negan is just as exciting as it was in the comics. The season never lets up the sense of inevitable doom all the way from the approaching horde to the lineup, and although the cliffhanger is infamous, Negan's monologue and Rick's petrified state are some of the strongest performances this franchise has ever seen. I love season 6, and I think its ability to build up tension is impeccable. I just don't think I love it as much as most people do. Now, I adore the grittiness season 3 brings, especially with its first 5 or 6 episodes. I seriously don't think this show has ever had a darker tone with how quick this group who has become family begins dropping one by one. The line from Rick saying, "We're dying here" on the phone is single-handedly the most haunting scene this show has ever provided, while the death of Lori, in my opinion, is still one of the most insane things this show ever did. The Governor and Michonne are S-tier additions to the show, while Merle's reintroduction and semi-redemption adds a whole other layer of drama. But I think we all know where this season's weak points lie, and that is within Andrea and honestly most Woodbury scenes that aren't focusing on the Governor himself. Don't get me wrong, the contrast between the grittiness of the prison and the on-the-surface sanctuary of Woodbury was fantastic. But between scenes of Rick butchering walkers and nearly killing his friends out of rage, or scenes of Andrea drinking lemonade, yeah, one is clearly more exciting than the other. And I'm not even gonna get into how dirty the writers did her in every sense, as we've all talked about that to death. Season 3 is an absolute classic installment of this franchise that could have easily gone fully off the rails between the showrunner changes. But at times, it can have pacing issues, while the writers had very little confidence in the ending, which is still regarded as one of the weakest finales to date. Okay, this is where I start really sweating when trying to rank these seasons. The Walking Dead Season 2 is an extremely well done season considering how much behind the scenes interference there was. It's funny to think that at one point this was regarded as the worst season of the show, but where this season shines brighter than any other is in the dialogue and character interactions. If you think about it, not a lot actually happens during their time on the farm in the grand scheme of things, yet every single one of these survivors are completely different people to when they first arrived, and I think that is the most compelling aspect of the season. The Frank Darabont era of the show was seriously something special. Everything from the cinematography to the sound design. For real, nowadays, this franchise can't just let a scene be silent, but that was one of the early era's strongest points. Cicadas and other insect noises often fill in for the score, and it really makes this world feel dead and empty. I love this season, but again, not a lot happens in terms of plot beyond inner character drama, which I believe the following rankings do just as well, but bring us in fresher directions as they go. Hunt or Be Hunted. Man, what a subtitle. Season 5 is often regarded as the best season of the show, and for many years, I would have agreed with that. The Hunter's arc spanning from no sanctuary to 4 walls and a roof is probably the highest quality 3-episode run this show ever had, with No Sanctuary often competing with Too Far Gone for my favorite episode of all time. When I think of moments that truly show off the brutality of the Walking Dead universe, I think of the lineup, the Pikes, and the Trough, which to this day still sends chills down my spine. This season also gives us this wonderful contrast towards the second half between the brutality of surviving without direction in the wasteland, and the difficulty of reintegrating back into a civilized society with Alexandria. You just feel like it's only a matter of time before they're either dead or something unrecognizable, which just gives so much value to what Alexandria was at the time. The problem with this season that keeps it from my number 1 spot, however, is the hospital arc. It is very much a step back in excitement compared to the arcs that come before and after it, while also not really amounting to anything, as all the arc does is kill off Beth and give us Noah, before killing off Noah towards the end of the season. I used to be able to gloss over it due to how good the rest of the season is, but the more time that passes, the more the hospital arc sticks out like a sore thumb. Still, this week arc does not take away from how amazing the rest of the season is, but does prevent it from beating out what's yet to be ranked. And with that, I am moving on from the good to great tier to the S tier. And although the following are my favorite installments of the franchise, like any piece of media, they still have their issues that I will be sure to highlight. Oh man, what is there to even say about Season 1 that hasn't already been said? I believe this is the season that had by far the most love put into it behind the scenes. Frank Darabont spent years trying to pitch the show to networks, and it really shows, because Season 1 probably has the most well-baked scripts out of any season in the franchise. Not only is the pilot still a top 5 episode, but not once does this season lose steam. It's by far the shortest season of the main show, but it utilizes every episode to the fullest extent, which is hilarious considering how these short seasons are handled now. But beyond the near-perfect pacing and structuring, much like Season 2, the dialogue is just perfectly written. Every conversation makes you feel like you're a fly on the wall, or corpse watching real people rather than watching a performance from actors. The sound design once again is perfect as it utilizes the less is more mentality, and the cinematography combined with the set design just makes everything look outstanding. Though I guess it's not hard to make something look good when it's given a real budget. What does keep this season from moving up any higher, however, is the finale. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great episode by itself with amazing tension, but to me the setting just feels so out of place for where we were in the story and introduced a lot of laws for the walkers that I feel like the writers are really struggling to make interesting today. Again, a great installment writing-wise, but it sticks out to me as a bit too sci-fi for what otherwise felt like a very grounded chain of episodes. Oh man, Season 4. I've been watching The Walking Dead since nearly the beginning when I was probably too young to be watching, but for some reason, this is the season I have the most nostalgia for. The funny thing is, for a long time, my love for this season came almost exclusively from the second half, as I thought splitting the group up into this nightmarish world was the most terrifying thing they could do at the time for these characters. And although that is still true, I've come to appreciate the darkness of 4A over the years just as much. Too Far Gone is the perfect episode of The Walking Dead. It's an episode of TV that would get your family members to stop what they're doing and start paying attention even if they've never seen the show before. Scott Gimple has gotten a lot of hate for the direction he's taken the franchise over the years, but I don't think anyone can take away the fact that he was firing on all cylinders during his first outings. Using Terminus, which was a show-exclusive community at the time, as bait for our survivors throughout the entire second half was genius. And although episodes like Still got a lot of hate at the time, I still think it's a compelling watch for what it is. Though I do find it funny that one of the only episodes to focus on a single pair was the most hated at the time. It's like Scott Gimple saw the feedback and said, what if we just do that but for every episode in 7A? Anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. Season 4 is a nearly perfect season that holds some of the greatest moments the show has ever seen, like the throat bite, look at the flowers, and the you're my brother scene. But what's stopping this season from ascending above number 3 are the Governor episodes. Sorta necessary, but boring as hell. I had to do it. For those of you who have not seen this season or don't remember it well, hear me out. I truly believe Fear the Walking Dead Season 3 has some of the most creative moments, characters, and plot lines in the series. I still can't comprehend how AMC saw this and said, nah, give me Morgan taking a shit. Because this is an example of using the concept of the zombie apocalypse to its fullest extent. At the beginning, this season seemed doomed as we were immediately hit with the premature death of Travis, who had become a fan favorite. But against all odds, the characters who take his place in the cast roster were honestly more interesting than Travis ever was. The first half of the season follows what I believe is the first pre-outbreak conflict we've seen carry on into the post-outbreak world between the Nation and the Clark's new harborers at Broke Jaw Ranch, which is a conflict born from prejudice and generations of injustice. Having to live with the enemy brings out so many interesting plot lines for the Clarks, but to be honest, the Clarks here get absolutely outshined in their own show by Troy Otto, the son of the Broke Jaw Ranch leader who is fundamentally unstable. Yet you can't help but get hyped when you see Nick slowly descend into a deeper and deeper friendship with him that brings out the worst in both. The second half of the season follows the fallout of Troy's attack on Brokejaw after exile, and immediately jumps into the plotline with the Proctors and Elbazar, which is just so interesting to see when the main show portrays the world as empty and dead. Characters like Walker quickly grow into allies as a result of Madison's ability to do the dirty work and ascend into core essential cast members, while the conflict between Strand and Daniel is something I'll never forgive Ian and Andrew for messing up so bad. God, I love everything about this season, except for the fact, of course, that it got cancelled by AMC. Dave Erickson had a 7-season run in mind for his vision, and you can just see all the interesting plot lines and dynamics being set up that will never be fulfilled. So unfortunately, a part of me does feel a sense of sadness when watching this season back. Still though, Fear the Walking Dead Season 3 is legendary, and I truly miss the characters who were obliterated in Momo and Friends. For those of you who have been watching my channel since the beginning, I'm sure you saw this coming from a mile away, but I know this is a relatively unconventional pick that needs explaining, though I find it hard to describe exactly why it beats out everything that came before in words without just saying, this season speaks to me. Seasons 1 to 8 may have all the amazing qualities I've discussed throughout this ranking, but for me, Season 9 feels like the natural evolution of everything that came before. Although I think Season 5 has the strongest 3-episode run in the franchise's history, I adore the first 5 episodes of Season 9 as it perfectly nails the tone of a world beginning to rebuild. In this short era, there's no longer clear villains and heroes. Like real-world politics, there are controversial issues among the Coalition, such as the aiding of the Saviors, that pits close friends against each other for very understandable reasons. But in my opinion, the strongest scene in this entire season by far is Daryl and Rick's fight in the pit, as it alone almost makes me accept Carl's death for what it was. Almost. Rick embodies the audience in this scene, but Daryl's line about forcing something that just isn't meant to be is so powerful. The only person that could have said that at the time and have Rick actually hear them was Daryl, and it leaves the two on a positive note before their inevitable separation, with Rick's final episode itself delivering the best case scenario for Andrew Lincoln's departure from the show. When we learned Andrew was leaving before the season premiered, most people, myself included, figured we were approaching the end, but I think the quality compared to the 2 seasons that came before is what hooked me so hard, as it was such a breath of fresh air. I do love the tone of those first 5 episodes so much, but I am also a sucker for time skips, so immediately jumping forward an additional 6 years in this world greatly helped usher in a new aspect of excitement while moving ahead into this Rickless era. And thankfully, the introduction of the Whisperers not only alleviated any fears of losing momentum, but brought back an aspect of The Walking Dead that has been missing for years: the horror. Evolution is a legendary episode, and if I wasn't familiar with the Whisperers in the comics at the time, I would have been losing my mind during this introduction arc. But from there, once the mystery was revealed, the season continues to make the Whisperers scary through their way of life and survival tactics, along with characters like Alpha and Beta who have sacrificed themselves to this dead world. Season 9 makes them feel like deeply disturbed people who could have been what our survivors became if they didn't find Alexandria. And although it is clear this is a cult from the get-go, Season 10 just goes a bit too overboard with the concept in my opinion, to the point of it treading in the territory of being unbelievable. Episodes like Guardians and Choke Point to me are back-to-back classics, and although a lot of people have issues with the Coalition becoming fragmented, I think the concept does work to make the Fair seem even more important, while elevating Michonne into this wildly overprotective character, which I think was the most interesting direction she had been taken down in years. Though I would agree if there was one thing I'd probably change from the season, it would most likely be that, as it does sort of make the war feel a bit less important. But finally, the Pike scene. Not only did it come in the penultimate episode opposed to the finale, which was a shocker that defied expectations in a good way, but it was executed nearly perfectly in terms of the tone and weight this horrific act brought. Admittedly, I do think Ezekiel probably should have been up there as well, like his comic counterpart, if they were planning on taking Carol down this self-destructive path, as it always felt like the writers weren't entirely sure what to do with him up until the very end. But for me, the death of Henry was by far one of the most shocking in years. Maybe some people saw it coming, but I just didn't for whatever reason. And I was one of the few people who actually liked his character in Season 9 and thought the storyline he was adapting with Carl worked much better for a kid his age. The Snowstorm finale isn't nearly as exciting as the previous, but it was just fun to finally see our characters in that setting while managing to slip in some extremely important plot points that would come back around in Season 10. The Walking Dead Season 9 is the season I look forward to the most on a rewatch. I think it has minimal slow points, and those moments that are less exciting at least continue introducing new ideas at all times. Angela Kang nailed everything about this season, and although I wish I could say I had the same affinity for the following 2 installments, I think the work done here in the face of insurmountable odds was incredible. Oh man, that was a long one. For those of you who stuck through this whole video, I greatly appreciate you. Admittedly, this took way longer than I thought it would and was much harder to put together than expected. Even now, I'm looking over my list and wondering if I put Season 6 too high, but at a certain point, you just gotta lock it in and trust your gut. Obviously, some of my choices are unconventional, but I'm sure some of you have unconventional picks yourself, so be sure to drop your rankings in the comments down below. Or if you don't feel like writing all that, just give me your top 10. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.